So I've been only slightly dreading making this video because, to my knowledge, this is going to be the most in-depth theological video on this topic on the internet itself. At least I looked on YouTube and there wasn't much. There was a couple videos, but nothing super in-depth. But the topic, is it a sin to share, download, or pirate copyrighted material, music, movies, software on the internet? Let's just take a look at this article from gotquestions.org. I actually like this website for the most part, but there's definitely some stuff that I disagree about, and I think this is going to be one of those articles that I don't agree with. The Bible tells us that we are to obey the laws of the government we live under, Romans 13, 1-7. That is one of the key issues at stake here. So basically, this is going to be the main argument for the idea that it is absolutely sinful to download an MP3 or something from a popular music artist, to which, follow me very carefully now, because do not hear what I'm not saying. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities. So there's no authority except from God, and those which exist have been appointed by God. These are human beings that we are supposed to be submitted to, okay? If simply on paper they say, don't do this thing, and then they never punish that behavior, in essence, it's not illegal. Speeding, for example, on the freeway. Oh, the speed limit's 70. But if I go 71, nobody cares. The cops themselves go 75, 80. Everybody goes 80 where I live, okay? Is it a sin for me to go 71 in a 70? In essence, the law of the land, according to the governing authorities, what they're actually enforcing is, no, probably like around 85, 90, or just basically looking like you're going way faster than everyone else, okay? But if I'm going the exact same speed as everyone else, then it's highly unlikely that I'm going to get pulled over, and I've never been pulled over. And so I am still in submission to the governing authorities, even though on paper, technically, I'm breaking the law of the land. But that's not what this is talking about. It's talking about the people, the governing authorities, okay? Now, again, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that if the governing authorities aren't punishing baby murder, for example, then it's okay to murder babies. I'm simply pointing out the distinction between the governing authorities and what is on paper according to this constitution over here. What are they actually enforcing? Federally, it's illegal to smoke weed in the United States. But at the state level, it's legalized. And even in the states where it is still illegal, there's still people who do it all the time. So in this discussion, it's not as simple as Romans 13 says, obey the government, and our government says not to do this thing, therefore you're sinning if you don't submit in this area. Well, the law is only as good as the governing authorities have power to enforce it. This is why God, being all powerful, his law is ultimate. We always have to obey him. But when it comes to human authorities, their authority obviously is not ultimate. They come and go like vapor. They live and they die. So speeding on the freeway, for example, if you feel convicted and you can't go 61 in a 60 because, you know, you're not obeying the governing authority, then okay, don't go 61 in a 60. It's not that deep, to be honest. I'm simply explaining why I don't feel terrible at all whenever I go 61 in a 60. The goal, at least in theory, for those speed limits is to keep people safe. And you could be the safest driver on the road breaking the speed limits all the time. And some of the safest drivers on the road are going to be the people who break the speed limits, because most people do anyways. But let's get a little deeper. So far, I've simply established that in essence, it's not illegal in the United States to download MP3s or movies or whatever, precisely because the governing authorities, which we're supposed to be submitting to, aren't going to punish you for it. There's no real thing to actually submit to in this area because in essence, they don't care about this. There's much more pressing matters to be dealt with, like baby murder, I hope, human trafficking, stuff like that. Because of copyright laws, it is legally wrong to download, pirate, or share copyrighted material without the permission of the artist, author, publisher. Since God commands us to obey the law, the practice of digital internet piracy is a sin where it is illegal. So, question, if it were legal, would it make it okay to still pirate? They bring up this issue of Napster, which is before my time, which is kind of irrelevant because most people are asking this because they're downloading stuff simply for personal use, not to reproduce the content and put it online for free or with advertisements and make money off of it. That's a different issue. So this issue is not as simple as, oh, the government says not to do it and God says to obey the government, therefore we shouldn't do it. It seems like I agree with this article, though, in that this issue has to be settled on a theological and philosophical, theonomic level rather than just this surface level. The government says I'm not allowed to do it. No, it has to do with what theft actually even is. Because in my research, all I've ever seen is pretty much the government says so, and it's theft, and stealing is wrong. And so that's a violation of the 8th commandment. There are ethical and moral considerations too. Taking someone else's property without permission is stealing. Agreed. And intellectual property is still property. So the question here is, can you prove this biblically? Where does the Bible talk about intellectual property? And by the way, I just want to point out the absurdities of intellectual property. You already know what side I'm on. I grew up during the time when that Happy Birthday song was, copyrighted, and you couldn't sing that in public, or you're going to get a fine for that. It's like, hypothetically speaking, let's just say someone comes up with the Happy Birthday song and starts singing it out loud, and they've never heard the original. According to this idea of intellectual property, that would be stealing. Someone accidentally committed a sin. And what does the Bible teach? God can't judge people for accidental sins, right? No, God judges people based on the intentions of their heart. To be able to prove in the court of law that someone actually stole intellectual property is impossible. A songwriter who worked to produce a song has earned compensation because the worker deserves his wages. But that's a different topic. What if a songwriter writes a song and he thinks it's really good, but it turns out that there was a song written 50 years ago by some guy that sounds a lot like it? Oh, that's apparently theft now, because you had a creative idea and that guy had a creative idea before you. So that guy's going to say, that's theft. You stole my idea. No, he didn't, actually. So this whole debate simply comes down to whether or not intellectual property is even a valid philosophical concept. Meaning, does it make sense for me to come up with a joke and then tell that joke and then legally require everybody else in my country not to tell that joke because that's my intellectual property? I told that joke. Oh, well, that's too small. Compare that to music. That takes a lot more effort and work. And what about movies? Obviously, that's hours long. That's just a completely different thing. Well, according to who? I could have taken 10 years to come up with that joke. That's a lot of hard work and effort. Is it criminal activity for someone else to make the same joke that I did, even if he took it from me and didn't give me credit? Is that criminal activity? Absolutely not, according to the scriptures. And I'm going to prove that in a little bit. But when it comes to defining what would actually constitute intellectual property theft, it is, at the end of the day, it has to be arbitrary. How long of a joke? How long of a movie? How long of a snippet of a song, for example? I also had this short conversation with the AI about how long until copyright becomes public domain, meaning if I create some sort of intellectual property, it's illegal for you to take that intellectual property of mine until sometime after I die. So there's expiration date on this type of property. But here's the deal. You guys can check this out if you want to pause the video and its answers and whatever I asked here. But basically what I wanted to show you is just another piece of the arbitrariness of copyright law, which strongly implies that this idea of intellectual property is just a man-made myth. Okay, this is my question here. So for Star Wars, would it be technically illegal to watch Star Wars on one of those pirating sites in 2072, but when the clock hits 2073, it would be okay? Yes, illegal, copyright still active. 2073, it's legal. So one moment you're watching this pirated movie, you're stealing, you're sinning against God, and 1 second later you're not, when you're doing the exact same activity. Again, that just reeks of arbitrariness. This is not a violation of the eternal moral law of God. So now let's quickly go over the idea of stealing in the law of God. We have the 8th commandment, you shall not steal. And yes, this is an English translation. What does the term steal mean? We all should understand what this means: to take the property of another wrongfully, and especially as habitual or regular practice. So this doesn't help us all that much because there is this idea, this category of intellectual property, which is in question and it's debated. So do we ever find this category of intellectual property in the scriptures? Does God tell people not to steal someone's intellectual property, or is God always commanding people to not take certain physical things, tangible things that people literally physically own? After all, we're physical creatures, we're not spirits. I know that's controversial. There's a lot of people who say that we are, but we're not. Exodus 22, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. Verse 2, if the thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. So again, what's talked about here is tangible stealing, someone physically taking someone else's stuff. But if the sun has risen on him, there will be blood guiltiness on his account. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If what he stole actually is found alive in his hand, whether an ox or donkey or sheep, he shall pay double. So tangible stealing. Verse 7 as well, if a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep for him, and it is stolen from the man's house. If the thief is caught, he shall pay double. If the thief's not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges to determine whether he laid his hands on his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it's for ox, donkey, sheep, clothing, any lost thing about which one says, this is it. So the type of stealing here is someone has something and I take it from them and they no longer have it. That's simply not what's happening in online piracy. And of course, verse 12 also talking about tangible theft. And before someone wants to come in and say, oh, well, they didn't have technology like we do now, and they didn't have the idea of intellectual property, and they weren't wise enough to come up with those laws back then. So that's God's law, right? He's smarter than all of us. They had music back then. They had stories, parables that they would tell to one another. Do you really think that there weren't people back then telling stories, storytellers for a living, right? There was people in the Greek cultures that would simply speak. The philosophers, the sophists, right? They made money off their preaching. When it comes to any era of time, if someone comes up with a story or a song for people to sing and other people sing it, of course, the person who created the song is going to want credit for that and may want monetary benefit from that, and perhaps might even seek to legally enforce other people to give them money for that. But is that the state's job? Is the state's job to make sure that people make money from their business, or they're making music or jokes or stories or whatever? No, it's to punish crime. And that's another argument that people would have is like, oh, you're taking money from... No, I'm not. I didn't take anything from them. They still have the music. They're still making a ton of money. And the only way that this argument could possibly work is if you were omniscient. You knew the future. Me downloading this thing here prevented their future profits. Also, people just assume that pirating makes companies lose in profit. For example, some people download video games for free on those websites that allow you to do that, and then they demo the game to see if they like it, and then they actually buy the game when they otherwise wouldn't have bought the game because they never tried it, and then they're not really interested. They found out that they actually like the game, and so they bought the full thing. And so piracy can sometimes increase profits for a company. So again, all these arguments that I'm running through in my head and researching, they all are so arbitrary, the ones that support this idea of piracy being just this terrible thing. And don't even get me started on the amount of ridiculous copyright claims, like the whole YouTube situation. I got a copyright claim once. Father Spyridon, yes, that guy, he striked my video. I've never been struck by anybody, but I have a strike on my channel now because of that guy. That dog should repent and believe the good news. That's the kind of stuff that happens when you have this kind of law in the society. You have a company like YouTube that just doesn't want to deal with it. So basically the way that they handle it is, if this guy says that this person stole his video, then we'll take down his video and we'll strike this guy's channel simply because he said this, even though the video was completely fair use. And also the idea of fair use is so arbitrary. You look up the laws regarding it, it's straight up just like made up. It's based on vibes pretty much. Oh, well, if it seems like they're, recreating it to a certain point, but if it's not enough, that, well, based on what? What's the rules on this? Right. So again, it's just all arbitrary. So to just wrap it all up and really just get the essence of the issue here, what people are claiming ownership over is information, not tangible things that we physically have, right? When I download an MP3, essentially what is on my computer is a bunch of zeros and ones put together in a certain order so that a sound comes out through the headphones or whatever. There's a lot more technical explanation for that. But can any one human claim to own a certain value of numbers put together in a certain way, a certain piece of information? I don't believe so. It honestly seems like it would be just as reasonable to claim that I own a certain number and I want to copyright this number here. And if anyone else says that number in the public sphere, then I'm going to have to find them. Give me your money. So that's basically what it is as I see it. Anyway, there's a lot more on this topic that you could get into, but in conclusion, I don't believe that using ad blockers or like downloading movies or music like that is theft, because I don't think that it's property to begin with. I don't think biblically that's a category, this idea of intellectual property. And also, by the way, I don't mind if you use ad blocker on my videos. I will say this though, $1 donated is equivalent to watching 1,000 of my videos. Okay. So basically my thing is be generous as a Christian, support people, but I don't think it's necessarily wrong to pirate anything. And I simply don't believe that it's the government's place, nor can they enforce such a law. You're not allowed to sing this song in public. It's like, you can't stop that. Anyways, that'll be all for today. Please comment down below your thoughts on this. If you think I missed anything or you disagree or whatever, just keep it respectful as always. You guys are a bunch of kind people. Most of you, right? Hopefully this helped you out. God help us all.